Chicago. This is Bruce DuMont with our Beyond the Beltway analysis of national politics, featuring occasional injections of rumor and innuendo, all offered up by our panel of political insiders, pundits, power brokers, public service professors, and most importantly, plain-speaking Americans from coast to coast. Tonight, featuring commentary by Bruno Barron, Stephanie Hitt, Charles Lipson, Tom Scher, and Kenny Romeyer from KLBJ Radio in Austin, Texas. Good evening, everybody. I'm Bruce DuMont. Thanks for joining us tonight. 1-800-723-8289 is the phone number. 1-800-723-8289. If you'd like to email me a comment, it's brucedumont@museum.tv. You want to tweet me a comment, it's @Dumo, @DUMO. And, of course, you can join us on the World Wide Web at www.beyondthebeltway.com. And also join us on our Facebook page, beyondthebeltway.com, and you will find us there. And this program is also live every night, every Sunday night, on Facebook. So if you're watching us on Facebook, you can also respond to the show and join the conversation, as we have been doing for the last several weeks. There is so much to talk about. We are going to begin by the tragic shooting again in Santa Fe, Texas. A little bit later on, we're going to hear from Kenny Romeyer. He is with KLBJ Radio. He's going to give us a perspective from Austin, Texas, which is one of our leading affiliates. But I want to get reaction from everyone to just another school shooting. Stephanie Hitt, you are a mother. Your reaction?
Well, and it's interesting because I was on the show when Sandy Hook happened, back a few years ago. So I feel like this is becoming an all too common topic. But it's also interesting because we've seen two very different situations involving school shootings this week, because here in Dixon, Illinois, there was someone who was prepared to do great harm and damage and was held off by an armed security guard. And then we look at a school that had somewhat hardened access by having armed security guards, where someone did slip through and wreak havoc. And so now I think the discussion is going to start turning towards how do we harden our schools.
30 other guests this evening is Tom Scher. Tom, nice to have you with us.
Good to be with you, Bruce.
You're a veteran anchor, reporter in Chicago, now in public relations. But 30 years ago today, America heard the name Lori Dan. That was a school shooting in Winnetka, Illinois, and you were one of the first reporters on the scene. So that was one of the very first, if not the first. Obviously, there was the shooting in Texas.
The college.
College.
Right.
But this was an elementary school. You
Yeah.
were there, and there's been, 60, 70 such stories since that time.
That's the shock of it all, really. 30 years ago, when the Hubbard Wood School, an elementary school in Winnetka, Illinois, just north of Chicago, was the scene of that school shooting. Multiple children struck. One died, Nicky Corwin, God rest his soul. We never, ever would have thought that this would happen again or frequently again. And yet we've had about 20 incidents of shots fired in schools this year, I believe. I think it's 22 now. And we're not even halfway through the year. It's shocking. It's devastating to think that you can't have schools be safe. But I don't know that the schools are unsafe. I think the issue happens before the shooter even gets to the school.
Bruno Barron also joins us. Bruno, nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
How much of this, in your view, is a copycat phenomenon?
It's interesting because in preparation for the show, I actually dug through and found a very, very good article. It's by David French in the National Review, and he recounts Malcolm Gladwell, the author, writing about this after Columbine. And he talked about the 3 or 4 before Columbine, but he basically said Columbine set a different stage. And the theory of this David French article is that we're in the middle of what he would call a slow-motion riot. And the first person to break a glass storefront in a riot is they're the leaders. But then it makes it easier for the second person, and it makes it easier for the third person. And the next thing you know, there's a riot. And what we have here, I think, it was a very good article, and I think it gets away from the Second Amendment debate and all the other debates that we have over these horrible incidences. And it starts talking about how not only are they copycat, Bruce, but the level of acceleration and the level of similarity kind of illustrates that this Malcolm Gladwell theory is actually very accurate.
Charles Lipson from the University of Chicago, you're also a father. Your reaction?
I find these things both incredibly depressing and incredibly repetitive, as you say. I mean, you can almost, and of course the news coverage, excuse me, and the political debates are exactly the same each time. We'll almost certainly begin to do what we did in response to terrorism, which is to begin to harden the sites. But once you do that, then these school shooters might just go to the mall or go downtown or go somewhere else. I'm also struck by the mental health issues of this. And Stephanie and I were talking before we went on air about the issue of parental, the parents. Where are they when kids are building weapons at home, collecting?
But in this particular case, it was the father. I mean, these were weapons that were purchased legally.
Yes.
They were in the house legally,
Right.
and the kid took them illegally or legally.
Right.
And so in this particular case,
Right.
all of the common denominators aren't that really common.
I think it's important to note that in this case, these were not automatic weapons.
Right.
There were no bump stocks, none of that. Had that been the case, had they had the weapons, the automatic or semi-automatic weapons used in other shootings, this would have been an even worse tragedy, and 10 people dead in Texas is horrible enough. Also, Lori Dan targeted her school 30 years ago because she had a vendetta against a family. She went to the school looking for 2 kids who ironically were gone on a field trip that day. But all these others, there's either someone who feels wronged, like this kid who thought he was who was bullied. I don't know if I haven't read a lot of whether he was or not, but
But he was rejected. There was a story this afternoon that
Okay.
some girl rejected him recently.
Right.
Right.
And
She
he killed
embarrassed him
her.
in class, and he went after her, and she was the first one shot.
that's that.
Well, you know, when I grew up in Mississippi, everybody had access to rifles. I mean, so the idea that you could come in, not everybody had handguns, although there were handguns in a lot of parents' home. My dad brought, home from World War II. But everybody could have come in, and there were plenty of people who were embarrassed and so forth. But like you said, Bruno, nobody broke the glass first.
Right.
Bruno's got a great point. The schools are now the preferred venue for this sickness. That's really
Yeah, well, and I'll give the credit to David French of the National Review, but thanks for mentioning it. The interesting thing that they talked about here, Bruce, was that, and it was a very scary. I mean, the article's depressing, but he basically says the scary thing is that Klebold and Hawk, whatever their guy was, the Columbine guys.
Columbine,
They were
Let's not mention
the
names.
Columbine.
That's a big thing for me. Let's not mention them.
Fair enough.
Not
The-
give 'em
the-
publicity,
The Columbine guys were they set the stage that everybody else is now following. And one of the points this article made that was kind of scary is that it used to be that you had to be really whacked out to do this, but now because the riot is in motion, like even seemingly like this kid that just did this was on the football team. He was actually part of a defense that stopped a big game for the opposition, and he was actually well liked. And then all of a sudden, some girl rejects him. He goes off, and now the predictability of who's actually going to do this is becoming harder and harder.
We have to pause. When we come back, we're going to hear from Kenny Remeyer at KLBJ in Austin, Texas. I'm Bruce DuMont. Thanks for joining us from coast to coast and border to border. Wherever you're listening tonight, nice to have you with us. Live from Chicago, it's Saturday Night Live, The Experience. Tuesday through Sundays, and open late on Wednesday nights at the Museum of Broadcast Communications. Order tickets at museum.tv.
A line is a powerful thing. It connects the global economy to your living room. Cleaner air to stronger markets. Factory floors to less crowded roads. Today's progress to tomorrow's promise. Norfolk Southern. One line, infinite possibilities.
Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Thanks very much for joining us. And joining us now via Skype in Austin, Texas is Kenny Rahmeyer. He is with KLBJ Radio. He joins us every Sunday night as part of what that station offers. Kenny, nice to have you with us on Beyond the Beltway.
Bruce. Thank you so much.
I begin by asking you to give us a sense of the local reaction that's come into your program and to KLBJ since the shooting the other day.
Yeah, we've done some talk shows since then, Bruce, and of course a lot of anguish, a lot of frustration, a lot of sadness. And it's kind of a mixed bag, you know. Some believe guns not the issue. Certainly mental health issues continue to be unresolved in the school settings. You know, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick was out there today talking about securing the schools and having more hardened facilities and having the teachers have some guns and so forth. So all of those things are a part of the mix. And then we had a caller this afternoon, Bruce, that said, look, you can do everything you want, but you're still not going to be able to identify that lone wolf. And, you know, this guy, at least based on the investigation so far, very few, if any, red flags. Now, we learned from ABC today that he apparently had studied some of the other mass shootings. They're finding that out from some of the journals that he left behind. But they believe he acted alone. They're not looking to charge anybody else. They had a couple of suspects or persons of interest, you know, but it appears he's the only one that's going to be charged. And the other thing, Bruce, that's really popped up in the last, I'd say, 24 hours is the mother of one of the deceased believes that her daughter's rejection of this guy's overtures over a period of several months may have been one of the factors that led him to do this.
Right. And in this particular case, I mean, and I said a few moments ago, there isn't really, all the common denominators are not the same in these school shootings because on the appearance, and by the way, it is the policy of our show, we don't name the shooter. We'll refer to him as the shooter. I don't want to give him any more notoriety. But again, I think it's important to know what we know and share what we know about him. In this particular case, he was on the football team. You know, he appeared to be a member of the Honor Society. That's one of the reports that I had earlier. And again, when you come right down to it in this particular case, he had access to his parents' or his father's guns. That happens probably a lot in Texas and a lot around the United States. But the other thing in this particular case, and again, this was similar to the shooting in Maryland a couple of months ago, and that is the rejection by the young man of a young lady. And so how many times in America does that happen with a teenager?
Exactly.
I mean,
it's the story of my teenage life.
But you have to worry about that. And as a parent, either, you know, as a parent of daughters, I worry if they're going to become the object of somebody's unrequited love. And that's something very important. Now, again, going back to something that Charles and I discussed, and I don't know, Kenny, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, but there is a sense that there was a private life that the parents weren't aware of, like
the building of these weapons,
buildings of explosives. I don't know. Maybe you can talk more about that, Kenny. What you know on the ground there, but you referenced some journals where he had written some things. He had been following things. This is a private life of building up this anger and this violence that people were not aware, parents aren't aware of, and that's a big question.
Kenny, do we know anything about it?
Really, the parents have told through attorneys to ABC News that they repeatedly have said they just didn't think he was capable of this kind of violence. They said that they're in the dark, they were stunned and shell-shocked, and they are looking for answers like everyone else at this point.
That rings hollow. That rings hollow with me because he had communication out there on social media. I'm not calling the parents liars. I'm calling them clueless. I'm not sure which is worse.
No, you're right. There was a lot of troubling posts in social media, and they're continuing to look at that stuff. You know, some pretty dark stuff, some stuff related to guns and all the rest. One other thing I'll bring up, you know, Chief Art Acevedo, who used to be our police chief here in Austin, he's now police chief in Houston. He was on CBS TV this morning, and he was talking about the need for tougher penalties for parents. Now, here in Texas, they're called negligent storage laws. I'm getting this from the Houston Chronicle, and you know, it's a misdemeanor. It's we're talking about fines and maybe a year in jail, but I think he was calling for much tougher penalties for parents who don't safely secure their weapons.
Did the father make any comment about how the kid got the weapons?
I've not seen anything about that up to this point, Bruce. Have not.
Charles Lipson has a question for you.
It's less a question than a comment. I think that what you're going to see is movement toward artificial intelligence for scanning social media, not only for this kind of behavior, but for possible terrorism. I think that there would be interest in DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. I think that you can imagine Google and Facebook, Instagram, and others who would say, who are now being increasingly held responsible for the fact that they're not getting ISIS videos or other things down quickly. But I think that there are real civil liberties concerns if you begin to target people. This is free speech. If the person is saying things other than a direct threat, I'm going to do X, I'm going to do something harmful to Bruce DuMont, and then it's just free speech.
It's public communication. So
Right.
public communication is fair game for investigative
Absolutely.
agencies
You're
to
absolutely
use as
right.
they see
Right,
fit.
it's out
This
there.
is
That's not
public,
private.
public information.
But I think this will be a target for increased artificial intelligence to find this stuff in advance.
Kenny, your reaction.
That may be a part of it. I know CEO Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook has challenged his team. In fact, they came back with a proposal of hiring thousands of people using more AI and all that, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. And he said, no, that's not enough. We got to do more. One thing I will point to, Bruce, is Governor Abbott, of course, is going to begin having some roundtable discussions on Tuesday with what he calls all the stakeholders. That doesn't seem very satisfying to, I think, many of us here in Texas. Governor Abbott is pointing to a pilot program out at Texas Tech that has, in short, it's designed to try to identify those kids in junior high or high school who are at risk of committing violence and to intervene before that happens. And they're showing some measure of success to the extent that Governor Abbott's pointing to that as a model and saying, we ought to do more of that. I challenge my listeners on the show today, Bruce, to say what can be done over the course of the summer. Right. You're not going to fix mental health issues. Nope. You're not going to have any gun control legislation or anything. So what can you do in 90 days to give parents and students a higher degree of confidence that starting this fall, something's going to be different in terms of safety in those schools?
Bruno Barron has got a comment for you, Kenny.
Kenny, directly to that point, I've read articles. This was one of them was post after the Florida incident that talked about teachers. Some teachers, for example, having various processes by which they try and look at the students that are shunned or the students that are teased or mistreated, and they try and bring them into the fold. And that sounds like that's something that Governor Abbott might be looking for, is that to not only trying to spot people in advance, but actually trying to change the interior culture or the way people are treated, if for no other reason than to let some of these people know that there's a way for them to get into the into the social setting in a school as opposed to being shunned and pushed outside of it. Any word on something like that?
Well, this program at Texas Tech tries to get these identified youth with some mental health counseling early on, that sort of thing. I think what you're referring to, I've heard, I believe her name is Nicole Hockley, one of the moms of one of the victims from Sandy Hook. Yep. Can't remember the name of the program, but she's really been putting a push on that to identify these loners and to how to kind of get them in the fold, so to speak, and have kids and teachers reaching out to them more.
Well, it comes down, I
part of
would
it.
say, Kenny, are you hearing these words down there in Texas? Conflict resolution. It comes down to how does one deal with conflict, whether the conflict is in their mind or whether it's in a public place. We have shootings in Chicago, certain neighborhoods every weekend where people resolve conflicts with guns. To me, it starts in the home. Society has a responsibility, but I think go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, now we're getting to a very, very personal level, and that is, for as long as there have been humans, and certainly in America, as long as there have been high schools, there have been cliques, there have been groups, there have been kids that have been bullied. And I know for years, I mean, when my daughters were going through middle school, they tried something on a slightly different level, but same idea is finding those girls that were bullied, finding girls that feel like they're left out. It's all well-intentioned, but we're humans, and we interact with each other in various ways. Those things, they sound good, but they're very hard to implement, and they don't always work because it really comes down to, again, parents, kids. How are you raised? What kind of person are you?
That is part of it, but I also think, and again, there will be the discussions in the coming weeks about the guns and the mental health and everything else, and also I think the kids from Parkland have pointed and said, at the federal government and at lawmakers, hey, you're dropping the ball. You're not making schools safe for us. I think that's a legitimate question to ask of the leadership. But I would also expand it and really throw the conversation back to the young people. You live in this environment. How do you treat people? There was a report that one of the leaders of the Parkland group is someone that basically had embarrassed the guy that did the shooting there. It's the point of the interaction of people who, as you say, who are in the clique and people who are outside of the clique. The only people that are going to deal with a parent is not going to deal with that.
Right.
The only people that are going to deal with that are their peers.
And they know. Kids
They should
know. They can tell you who is and who isn't.
That's right. We've got to move on. Kenny, thanks very much for being with us tonight from
Yes, sir. Thanks, Bruce.
KLBJ. Kenny Rahmeyer, a veteran talk show host, part of our Sunday night bill of fare on KLBJ. I'm Bruce DuMont.
If you look hard enough, go off the beaten track far enough, you'll find an America teeming with the unusual, the odd, the downright strange.
I'm Will Klinger, and I'm your guide on a package tour we like to call
Wild Travels.
While we're preparing a new season of Wild Travels for next year, join me for some of our favorite episodes Tuesdays at 7:30 p.m. on WTTW Prime.
Moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Thanks very much for joining us. We're talking about the shooting in Santa Fe, Texas. We'll also be talking about other issues as the program unfolds this evening. In the first segment, I referenced that Tom Scher, one of our guests this evening, 30 years ago today was the first shooting at a school, an elementary school outside of Chicago in Winnetka, Illinois. You were one of the first reporters on the scene. And to refresh people about that story, and again, it may seem calm in comparison, but the fact that it started a trend that we're dealing with in Santa Fe, Texas, and that is, in this particular case of Lori Dan, this was a very troubled young lady. She had given more signals to more people, her parents, psychiatrists, her ex-husband, her ex-boyfriend. I mean, the list of grievances against her before she took her weapons and shot up that school were massive,
Yes,
Massive.
she was known to police as a problem, but she wasn't known as someone who was likely to commit a violent act. There had been some harassing things, some stalking issues, things like that. She had babysat for that family, the family of the 2 kids she went to shoot at the school, who, as I mentioned earlier in the show, were not there that day. But there were signs that she was a problem, and the police, she was known to them, and they had dealt with her.
What about the parents?
That's the issue that has never, in my view, been sufficiently addressed. But the parents didn't do enough to care for her mental health. On the other hand, she was an adult. The parents were legally prevented from doing certain things. So at some point,
she was 30 years old at the time.
yeah, at some point things are going to happen that you cannot avoid, and no one has a cure-all for this. But back then, the one thing I'm stuck with is she had one weapon, a handgun. And I think what we're getting away from the core issue of most of these shootings here. The issue is not school safety. The schools are pretty safe. The issue is what happens before the school, what type of weapons are being used. And that's the scariest part of all. Lori Dan had a handgun, and thank goodness she was not able to shoot more kids. One died, one nearly died. They saved her life at Evanston Hospital, just north of the city.
But in her particular case, she went after people because she had vengeance against them.
Yes.
She singled people out. They were not random like some of the students that we've seen recently in recent shootings, with the exception of what happened in Santa Fe. I mean, this is the first time that there's been a mother that has said, okay, this is a guy that was way too aggressive on my daughter. She embarrassed him in class. And then when he came in with his guns, he went after her, and she was the first one shot and killed. So, and he only shot people that he didn't like.
Right.
So, I mean, this is a guy with a plan.
Right.
It wasn't just random shooting.
And he declared that.
He declared that.
But, you know,
social media.
It is interesting, though, in almost all of these cases, though, it may not have been as personal or as specific, but there is generally an anger, a problem with the community at large. Maybe not in an individual, but we saw that, in the Parkland case, that people felt rejected. Maybe not rejected by a specific person, but maybe by the community as a whole, or by a class as a whole, or by teachers. There were, I believe it was Parkland, where there was actually a teacher that he was frustrated with. So there are these projections from the shooters of some sort of retaliation, some revenge that's going into these.
But it's a couple of issues, Stephanie. One is it's hard to know what you would do in advance if there's not a specific threat. You said, for example, she wasn't known to be violent, but let's assume she was even known to have violent tendencies, but there'd not been a specific threat against anyone. It's hard to know what the police could do.
Right.
But
in her case, there was a psychiatrist that said she was okay.
Okay.
Yes.
And this is a particular issue, but there's another issue, which is we're working backwards from someone who's known to have done the shooting. If we worked the other way and said how many people are violent or angry or have been rejected by a girlfriend or boyfriend,
Right.
we would find quite a lot of them.
Yes.
And what the heck are you going to do about this large number of people without violating a lot of people's civil rights?
Well, and that goes to the point I made earlier about how that the threshold for craziness, and I don't mean that in a negative or a derogatory
Present company
way.
accepted,
Yeah,
of course.
and the threshold for how nutty or how off balance these people are is dropping dramatically. I mean, this guy gets rejected by a girl, and he decides to do something like this, and probably like if you'd use some kind of mental health screening on this guy right before it happened, it might not have triggered anything. Whereas the Parkland shooter was going to trigger all kinds of things, right? I mean, I think Parkland is probably the one example of the failure of law enforcement.
It was completely avoidable.
FBI law enforcement.
Yes.
This was something where, and so we have to ask ourselves, and Charles, I think you're getting at the thing about civil rights, but at some level, we're going to have to ask ourselves whether we want to take the kind of prophylactic measures that might be necessary to stop some of these things, or conversely, not just harden schools, but more armed guards, more armed teachers.
And those are coming, I think.
I've got to say this, all right? This idiotic idea was put forth first, and I didn't mean to insult you, Bruno, because I'm talking about Donald Trump was the first significant official I ever heard say, arm the teachers. That is the stupidest idea I have ever heard in my life. Arming the teachers, so you're going to have a teacher down the hall armed, but the shooter's on the other side of the school shooting up that classroom. Are we going to arm every teacher? That's insane. The schools are virtually safe enough. Maybe some more armed guards, I get that. Police officers, such as the one in Dixon who saved a tragedy there. But arming teachers is ludicrous.
Really quickly on that specific point, I think that there's still a conversation to be had. I understand your critiques, and I think when I actually put that up on Facebook, and I had a lot of pushback from it, so I kind of thought about it and I addressed it this way, is that to the extent that it would be teachers, I would say a couple of things. Number one, only after what I would call serious, almost paramilitary style training that they volunteered for, that they knew what they were doing, I would say that if a teacher wanted to engage in that, and I would even talk about increasing their pay or something like that. So I wasn't just talking about Donald Trump getting them all 6 guns and putting on the belts and pretending they were Raylan Givens or something. Basically, just saying that it would be something that they would be volunteering for and training for specifically and aggressively. So I'm not 100% sure that I agree with you 100% on your critique, but I think it's a conversation worth having.
Well, something I want to just say, if I can just make a comment about Donald Trump. And regular listeners to the show will know that one of the things about Donald Trump that I like is that he said things in the campaign that he was going to do, and he's doing them. He's a politician who's doing what he said he's going to do. And this was based on the litany of issues that he recited during the campaign. Sometimes when you get elected president, there are issues that come up that aren't on your wish list. They're not on the list of things that you promised, and they just fall on your plate. The issue of school shootings and Parkland, and what the president did following the series of White House listening sessions, which I praised on this program, even though I said the idea of school arming teachers was not a good idea. He showed a compassionate side. He showed someone that had a capacity to do something that was going to be unpopular with his base. And he was hailed by it. And he completely caved. So in my view, that insofar as an issue that popped onto Donald Trump's desk that he didn't ask for, as the president, as the leader of the country, he's failing the people on this issue. It isn't just failing his base. Forget about the base. He's failing society. He's failing making life better in America. Despite the rhetoric of what he said he was going to do, he hasn't done it.
What specific thing was that you're...
He was specifically talking about that there was going to be background checks. Some of the things that he talked about, Rick Scott did in Florida, some of those things. Yeah. But the other things about, he was going to get the NRA to sort of rethink some of their positions on a number of issues, hasn't done it. That was not the speech he gave when he went to the NRA, completely different speech. So I'm just saying is the compassion. I mean, this is when the first session that he had, which was with the parents and students, he actually shut his mouth and he listened. That was a very positive thing. Then the next day, when he brings the governors in, then he starts talking about possibly the teachers, and that's when the whole issue went, went all about with the teachers. But the guy, he absolutely missed a golden opportunity, and he seized that opportunity. What happened in Santa Fe, Texas, might not have happened.
Well, and what we're seeing is that his initial reaction was Donald Trump, the human. With the compassion and so on. And then what we see is, sadly, what happens to a lot of people, and then somehow politics intervenes. And, people get involved, and then he's going to have to walk back maybe what he genuinely feels. And I think he reacted in a very common sense way, a lot of people felt. And sadly, you're right. Somehow politics intervened somewhere, and he had to back it off.
I haven't heard anybody in the Republican Party or anybody who can call themselves a conservative, even the conservative Democrat, we all know where most Democrats are on gun control. No one is willing to go down the slope a little bit and have meaningful gun control in this country. Now, different This case in Texas, he didn't have bump stocks and automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons and large clips and changing clips during the shooting, which other shooters have done. He didn't have an automatic weapon like the Las Vegas adult who shot at other adults in a public concert had. But most of the shootings are like that. Why the weapons exist, why people have the right to get them, is shocking to me in this country. It's foolish. It's folly. I will say this: even the most ardent gun control advocate, who has to admit, the most liberal person has to admit that if we outlaw all guns, criminals will still have guns. They will get them and they will use them. These have not been criminals. We need to cut down the margin, eliminate the automatic weapons, the semi-automatic weapons, the big clips, all of that stuff. That's what we ought to be doing. That's what all the critics have really been talking about.
That's right, and we'll be back with more in a moment. Live from Chicago, it's Saturday Night Live, The Experience. Tuesday through Sundays, and open late on Wednesday nights at the Museum of Broadcast Communications. Order tickets at museum.tv.
CSX moves forward, so do the rest of us.
Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. We got one more segment on this topic. Let's go to Dave, listening to us in El Paso, Texas on KTSM. Go ahead, Dave. You're on the air.
Thank you very much for letting me comment. I'll be brief. One of your panel members really denigrated the idea of arming teachers, but in 17 states already allow that. And so the president, and it's been going on since 2011 or 2013. So it wasn't the president who introduced this idea. We do it in the state of Texas. Colorado does it.
17 states allow it, sir. How many teachers are actually armed?
Well, I
mean, roughly speaking.
No, sir. The point is you denigrated the idea as being a stupid idea, but several teachers in those states are armed. So it's not a stupid idea, according to the governors of 17 states.
I should also say very emphatically, I am a Democrat. I am a left of center, a right of center Democrat. I know you've probably figured out I'm a Democrat. I'm in favor of concealed carry. I want to make that very clear. I think concealed carry has not at all been a failure. So go ahead. I'm sorry, Charles.
A couple of good points that are useful about these 17 states. First, we want to see what works, and sometimes that just happens with experimentation. One of the problems here is that the goal of having armed teachers, for example, is not primarily to take down an active shooter, but to deter people from coming in and doing these things in the first place. If the person is coming in to do suicide by police or whatever, then the fact that you have armed teachers wouldn't have any effect. But we just don't know if it's deterred people.
Dave, let me ask.
Go ahead. I would suggest to you that in most cases, and I think I'm agreeing with you to some extent, in most cases, teachers are the only adult in the classroom. And they're not going to be, even if they have a weapon, they're not going to be able to leave the classroom. They're not going to be inclined. Their first duty is to the 30 students or how many ever students are in their classroom. However, there are some situations where there are 2 adults in a classroom, maybe even 3 sometimes. Could be a sports team practice, et cetera, et cetera. And in those cases, one of those teachers, if he was duly trained and had the disposition to do so and had the authority to do so, could in fact augment local law enforcement and be the first responder. Now, in my situation, and I used to teach in one of the local schools here, I had a second teacher. I also had a secure place where I could lock my students. And so if, in fact, our school had gotten into a situation and our school district was one of the ones in Texas, if it were one of the ones in Texas, it's not, unfortunately, that allowed armed teachers, I would not have had any qualms going out using my prior military training and my training as a concealed carry holder to confront probably someone who was less trained than I am.
Bruno Barron has a question or comment, Dave.
Well, so I actually, Dave, it's not really so much a question, it's a comment. I actually like the way you're approaching it, and it's the way I think more of us, left and right, should approach problems as we start trying to think them through. There's mall shootings. There are college shootings, church shootings. So these are all kinds of things that kind of, and we all focus on the school shootings more probably because it's a school, the people are younger, they're more innocent or whatever you want to look at the way that the reason they impact us so much. But I like the way you're thinking, because what I'm looking at is that maybe it's not arming teachers per se as like a single bullet, the silver bullet that's going to fix everything, but to say what is the best way to harden schools for stuff like this while we try to figure out how to solve the rest of the problem culturally or mental illness wise.
One more comment real quick about hardening schools. And I don't understand why the idea of introducing or using magnetic door locks on a larger scale has not really been seriously discussed.
Magnetic what?
Magnetic door locks. For example, a long time ago, when I was a company commander in the Army, we had issues with soldiers leaving or inviting young women into the barracks at night because the doors could not be secured. Well, that was solved, and it was solved by retrofitting the doors with magnetic locks that were controlled by that had a central control in the barracks. So the soldiers could not open the door without the alarm being triggered, and really once the door was locked, it really couldn't be unlocked except by the individual, the charge of quarters. And that's done all over the place. Magnetic locks. I just don't understand why
would there be a fire escape issue, Dave, that would be brought up?
Not at all, because again, fire alarms are controlled usually by the campus administration, and the campus administration would be able to trigger the appropriate locks to let the students leave the campus.
In your particular case, we've got another caller on the line, but I want to ask you one question because you're from El Paso, Texas. It's off topic, but I want you to give me kind of a short version. We obviously talk a lot about illegal immigration in this country. It's a huge political issue. That obviously is an issue that's hot and heavy in El Paso, Texas. How bad or good is the issue of illegal immigration in your hometown of El Paso? Is it horrible or is it okay?
It's a big problem in that there are large numbers of undocumented or illegal people residing in our city and going to our schools. It's certainly I won't call it a burden, but it certainly is an expense that's borne by the school district. But there's not a lot of crime here, and I think the main place we see it is that maybe in suppressed wages for high school dropouts and things like that. Mm-hmm. But as far as seeing the types of crimes that we're seeing in some other places where we're just not seeing those here in El Paso.
Okay. Dave, listen, thank you very much.
We're not seeing a lot of the problems.
Thank you very much for your perspective. Good call tonight. Nice to have you listening to us on KTSM, one of our oldest affiliates. We're going to stop chatting about this particular issue. If you're standing on the line, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to you. However, we'll be back for another full hour, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about the Supreme Court, sports betting, North Korea, and Donald Trump.
Welcome to the world, 2116. You can fly across town in minutes, or across the globe in under an hour. Whole communities are living on Mars, and solar satellites provide Earth with unlimited clean power. In less than a century, Boeing took the world from seaplanes to space planes, across the universe and beyond. And if you thought that was amazing, you just wait.
Today, fresh fruits and vegetables will go from a field in California to a grocer in Miami. A bottle of beer from Eagle Pass will journey to a restaurant in Manhattan. A 2x4 in Oregon will find its way to a townhome in Denver. A hybrid will say goodbye to Detroit and hello to a showroom in Austin. While a steel beam will leave a mill in Illinois for a high-rise in Phoenix. And a flat screen in China will head to an electronics store in Memphis. Because today, as every day, wherever you find business, you'll find us.
Live from Chicago, it's Saturday Night Live, The Experience. Tuesday through Sundays, and open late on Wednesday nights at the Museum of Broadcast Communications. Order tickets at museum.tv.